My name is Anthony Hall, and I am 69 years old. This is the story of an event that changed my life forever, an encounter that occurred in October of 1999. I've spent the better part of my life working as a park ranger, a career that began in a modest patch of forest and eventually led me to the vast expanse of Olympic National Park in the Pacific Northwest. It's a rugged territory filled with dense, untouched forest, perfect for someone who craves a bit of solitude. Most of what we do as rangers involves light patrols, campsite maintenance, and the occasional bit of search and rescue when hikers get a bit too ambitious and lose their way. It's not glamorous work, but it's honest and rewarding. There's something about being out there, surrounded by nature in its purest form, that speaks to the soul, the crisp air, the rustling leaves, the distant call of birds. It's a symphony of life that can't be replicated anywhere else. That fateful autumn morning started like any other. I woke early, as was my habit, to the sound of raindrops pattering against the roof of my cabin. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and pine, a smell I'd come to associate with home. I went through my morning routine mechanically. A quick shower, a hearty breakfast of oatmeal and strong coffee, and a final check of my gear. It was during this last task that the call came in from dispatch. "Mitchell," the voice crackled over the radio, "we've got a situation." A group of teenagers went out on an unapproved overnight hike and failed to return on schedule. My heart sank. It wasn't an uncommon occurrence, but it never got easier. Each time you hoped for the best, but prepared for the worst. "How long have they been out?" I asked, already reaching for my pack. "They've been due back for 2 days now. No contact since they ventured in 3 days ago." I nodded to myself. Cell signal is a fickle thing deep in the woods, so after initial contact is lost, we typically give them a couple of days in case they've just run into delays. But after waiting it out, it was time to go in. "I'm on it," I responded. "Who's my partner for this one?" "Cooper," came the reply. "He's already been briefed and is heading your way." Ben Cooper, a seasoned ranger and one of the best in the business. If anyone could help me find these kids, it was Ben. I felt a small surge of relief knowing he'd be by my side for this operation. As I waited for Ben to arrive, I double-checked my gear. Standard equipment for a search and rescue. Emergency supplies, first aid kit, radio, extra batteries, water purification tablets, high-energy rations, and a topographical map of the area. I also packed a rifle, more for animal encounters than anything else. Even back then, I felt uneasy about carrying it. There was something about bringing a weapon into that pristine wilderness that felt wrong. But it was protocol, and easier to hike with it than get in trouble for not following procedure. Ben arrived just as I was shouldering my pack. He was a tall, lean man with a weather-beaten face that spoke of years spent in the outdoors. His eyes, a startling blue, were sharp and alert as they met mine. "Ready to go find some wayward teens?" he asked, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. I nodded, trying to match his light tone. "Let's hope they're just having too much fun to remember to check in." We both knew the reality could be far grimmer, but neither of us voiced those thoughts. In this job, optimism wasn't just a comfort, it was a necessity. As we set out, the mist was just beginning to lift from the forest floor, revealing the vibrant greens and rich browns of the woodland. The trail ahead of us disappeared into a sea of towering trees, their branches forming a cathedral-like canopy overhead. It was beautiful, awe-inspiring, and just a little bit terrifying. Little did I know, as we took our first steps into the wilderness, that this search would lead us into the heart of a mystery that would haunt me for the rest of my life. The first day of our search was uneventful, almost frustratingly so. We moved fast, staying light on our feet and covering as much ground as possible. Our plan was to cover the known route first, then begin a grid search in the areas where the teenagers were more likely to have strayed. As we hiked, Ben filled me in on more details about the missing group. There were 4 of them, 2 boys and 2 girls, all aged between 16 and 17. They were local kids, which was both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, they had some familiarity with the area. On the other, that familiarity might have bred overconfidence. Their parents mentioned they were headed for Crescent Lake, Ben said as we navigated a particularly dense patch of underbrush. Apparently, it's become something of a local legend among the high school crowd. Secluded, beautiful, perfect for an illicit camping trip. I frowned. Crescent Lake? That's way off the approved trails. How did they even know about it? Ben shrugged. Internet, probably. You know how it is these days. Every secret spot ends up on someone's blog or social media. I shook my head, feeling every bit of my 33 years. The world was changing fast, and not always for the better. When I was a kid, we respected the wilderness, understood its dangers. Now it seemed like every teenager with a smartphone thought they were Bear Grylls. As we pressed on, we called out periodically, our voices echoing through the trees. We whistled. We scanned for any sign of disturbance, snapped branches, footprints that deviated from the trail, discarded trash. Nothing. The forest remained stubbornly, oppressively silent. As the sun began its descent, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, barely visible through the thick canopy, we made the decision to make camp. We found a small clearing just big enough for our 2-person tent and a small campfire. As we sat around the crackling flames, eating our rations, our conversations were a mix of practical discussions about the next day's search patterns and idle talk about our families. It was during these quiet moments that Ben, the veteran, would often regale me with stories from his early ranger days. You know, he said, poking at the fire with a stick, I've been doing this job for over 2 decades now, and I still get surprised sometimes. I looked up from my meal, intrigued. How so? Ben's eyes took on a distant look, as if he was seeing something beyond the dancing flames. About 5 years back, I came across this campsite. It was, well, destroyed, doesn't quite cover it. The tent was ripped to shreds, sleeping bags torn apart, gear scattered everywhere. I felt a chill run down my spine despite the warmth of the fire. Bear attack? Ben shook his head slowly. That's what I thought at first, but there was no blood. Not a drop, and some of the damage, it didn't look like animal claws or teeth. It was almost deliberate. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of his words hanging heavy in the air. Finally, I cleared my throat. What do you think it was? A small, wry smile crossed Ben's face. Well, the official report says unknown animal encounter. But between you and me, I've got no idea, and that's what scares me most. We tried to lighten the mood after that, joking about the possibilities. A runaway bear with OCD, maybe. Or perhaps the ever-reliable Bigfoot, redecorating campsites in a fit of artistic expression. But the unease lingered, a subtle undercurrent to our forced laughter. As we settled into our sleeping bags that night, Ben's voice cut through the darkness. Just get some sleep, Anthony. Tomorrow's going to be a long haul. He was right, of course. Even a few hours of fitful sleep was a necessity out here. But as I lay there listening to the nocturnal sounds of the forest, my mind kept circling back to those kids. Where were they? Were they huddled together somewhere, cold and scared? Or had something worse befallen them? That night, I dreamt of their voices calling out for help amidst the towering trees. In my dream, I ran toward the sound, but no matter how fast I moved, the voices always seemed to be just out of reach, fading into the impenetrable darkness of the forest. Day 2 dawned gray and misty, the sun a pale disk barely visible through the thick canopy above. We broke camp quickly, eager to resume our search. The weather had taken a turn for the worse overnight, a light drizzle falling steadily, turning the forest floor into a treacherous mix of slick leaves and mud. As we hiked, the terrain grew steadily more challenging. We were moving away from the well-maintained trails now into the true wilderness. The slopes became steeper, the underbrush thicker. Every step required careful consideration, and our progress slowed to a frustrating crawl. "We're getting close to where Crescent Lake should be," Ben said, consulting his map. "If the kids made it this far, they would have had to camp somewhere around here. Keep your eyes peeled for any signs of recent activity." I nodded, my eyes scanning the surrounding forest. The rain had picked up, reducing visibility and making it harder to spot any potential clues. The constant patter of droplets on leaves created a white noise that seemed to deaden all other sounds. As the day wore on, the forest seemed to close in around us. The trees grew closer together, their branches intertwining overhead to form a dense canopy that blocked out most of the daylight. Even with the sun at its zenith, the forest floor was cloaked in twilight shadows. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the steady rhythm of our breathing and the squelch of our boots in the mud. I found myself straining my ears for any sound out of place. A distant shout, the crack of a branch, anything that might indicate human presence. It was in this state of hyper-alertness that I nearly missed it, a flash of color, so out of place in the muted greens and browns of the forest that at first I thought I'd imagined it. I raised my hand, signaling Ben to stop. "What is it?" he whispered, his hand instinctively moving to the rifle slung across his back. I pointed silently. There, caught on a thorny bush about 20 feet off the trail, was a scrap of bright blue fabric. It fluttered weakly in the light breeze, a stark contrast to its natural surroundings. Ben and I exchanged a look. This was the first real sign we'd seen of the missing teens. Without a word, we moved toward it, our senses on high alert. As we drew closer, I could see that the fabric was synthetic, the kind used in high-end hiking gear. It was relatively new, with only minor weathering from exposure to the elements. This hadn't been here long. Ben carefully disentangled the scrap from the bush, examining it closely. "No blood," he murmured, "but look at these edges. They're frayed, like it was torn off forcefully." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the damp weather. "Animal attack?" I suggested, though even as I said it, I knew it didn't quite fit. The tear was too clean, too deliberate for a random encounter with wildlife. Ben shook his head slowly. "Maybe, but let's not jump to conclusions. Fan out, see if we can find anything else." We split up, moving in a careful spiral pattern outward from the bush. It didn't take long to find more evidence. About 10 feet away, I spotted another scrap of fabric, this time a vibrant pink. A little further on, a tattered bandana patterned with cartoon characters, decidedly young and out of place in these woods. "Anthony!" Ben's voice cut through the silence, tight with tension. "Over here." I hurried toward his voice, my heart pounding. He was crouched near the base of a massive fir tree, its roots creating a tangled maze above the forest floor. As I drew closer, I saw what had caught his attention. Half buried in the leaf litter and mud was a cell phone. Its screen was a spiderweb of cracks, the casing dented and dirty. Ben carefully extracted it from the muck, turning it over in his hands. "It's dead," he said, pressing the power button to no effect. "But look at this." He pointed to a series of deep scratches on the back of the phone. They were parallel lines, evenly spaced, almost like claw marks. I breathed the words, barely audible. "Jesus." Ben nodded grimly. "Whatever happened here, it wasn't good. We need to." His words were cut off by a sound that made my blood run cold. It was distant, barely audible over the steady patter of rain, but unmistakable. A scream. Human. Filled with terror, and coming from somewhere deeper in the forest. We were on our feet in an instant, all thoughts of caution forgotten as we plunged into the underbrush toward the source of the sound. The forest seemed to work against us, branches whipping at our faces, roots reaching up to tangle our feet, but we pressed on, driven by a desperate need to reach whoever had made that terrible sound. The scream came again, closer this time, but cut off abruptly. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the scream itself. We burst into a small clearing, our rifles raised, ready for what? We didn't know. But what we found was worse than anything we could have imagined. The clearing was a scene of chaos. A tent lay in tatters, sleeping bags and backpacks strewn about as if tossed by a giant hand. And everywhere, on every surface, were smears and splatters of a dark, viscous substance that I knew with a sickening certainty was blood. But it was what lay at the center of the clearing that truly froze us in our tracks. A body. Or what was left of one. It was barely recognizable as human, torn and mangled beyond belief. The face was mercifully turned away, but I could see long dark hair, matted with blood and leaves. I felt the bile rise in my throat, my vision swimming. In all my years as a ranger, I'd never seen anything like this. It was carnage, pure and simple, beyond the capabilities of any animal I knew. Ben was the first to snap out of the shocked stupor. "We need to call this in," he said, his voice hoarse now. I nodded numbly, reaching for my radio, but before I could key it on, a low rumbling growl echoed through the clearing. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard before, not quite animal, not quite human, but something horrifyingly in between. Slowly, almost against my will, I turned toward the source of the sound. There, at the edge of the clearing, half hidden in the shadows of the trees, stood a figure. It was massive, easily 7 feet tall, its body a twisted mass of matted fur and corded muscle. But it was its eyes that captured me, gleaming with an intelligence that was utterly inhuman. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, we stood frozen, locked in a standoff with this impossible creature. Then, with a roar that shook the very air around us, it charged. "Run!" Ben's shout snapped me back to reality. We turned and fled, crashing through the underbrush with no thought for direction or stealth. Behind us, I could hear the creature pursuing, its heavy footfalls and guttural snarls spurring us to even greater speed. We ran until our lungs burned and our legs trembled. The forest a blur around us. At some point, Ben yelled something about splitting up, and I veered off to the right without thinking. I could still hear him crashing through the undergrowth to my left, his presence a perverse comfort amidst the chaos. I don't know how long I ran. Time seemed to warp, blending into a nightmarish blur of pounding heartbeats and ragged breaths. At some point, I stumbled and fell, hard, pain exploding in my knee. But fear drove me back to my feet, ignoring the white-hot agony that shot through my leg with every step. Finally, gasping and drenched in sweat, I burst out of the thickest part of the forest and found myself on a familiar path, one of the secondary trails we'd passed on our first day of searching. It was like a lifeline, a thin thread of sanity in this all-encompassing madness. I ran, no longer thinking of direction, simply driven by the need to put distance between myself and that thing in the woods. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. But every explanation fell short. This was beyond my understanding, beyond anything I'd encountered in my years as a ranger. I don't know how long it took me to reach the ranger station. I remember a blur of faces, frantic voices, and a whirlwind of urgent questions. My words tumbled out in a confused jumble. The campsite, the body, the creature. I must have sounded like a madman. It was only when I'd finished my breathless account that I realized something was missing. Ben. Where was Ben? The next few hours passed in a haze of activity. A search team was quickly assembled, armed with high-powered rifles and tracking dogs. I wanted to go back out there to find Ben, but my injured knee and the wild look in my eyes convinced them to keep me at the station. As night fell, I sat in the small break room, an untouched cup of coffee growing cold in my hands. Every creak of the building, every shadow at the window sent a jolt of fear through me. I kept expecting to see those inhuman eyes peering in at me from the darkness. The search team returned in the early hours of the morning, empty-handed and shaken. They'd found the clearing I'd described, but there was no sign of the body I'd seen. No blood, no shredded tent, nothing to indicate the horror I'd witnessed, and no sign of Ben. Days turned into weeks. The search expanded, with teams from neighboring counties joining in. They scoured every inch of the forest using helicopters, infrared cameras, anything they could think of. But it was as if Ben and whatever had attacked us had simply vanished into thin air. The official explanation was an animal attack, possibly a rogue bear or cougar. It was a flimsy explanation, and everyone knew it, but it was easier than the alternative. Even I found myself clinging to that explanation in my weaker moments, desperate for any rationalization that could make sense of what had happened. As for the missing teenagers, 3 bodies were eventually found, miles from where they should have been. The official report cited exposure and animal scavenging as the cause of death. The 4th was never found. In the weeks and months that followed, I couldn't bring myself to go back into the woods. The creak of floorboards in my own home would send me leaping to my feet, my heart pounding. Even in the safety of my living room, surrounded by familiar things, I was haunted by the echo of that creature's roar, the image of its inhuman eyes seared into my memory. They eventually forced me to take time off, mandated counseling sessions that did little to ease the weight of what I'd experienced. At first, I resisted. If I wasn't actively doing something to find Ben, then what was the point? But with time, the futility, the sheer hopelessness of it all sank in. I never went back to being a ranger. I couldn't face setting foot in the wilderness again. The city felt wrong, cramped, stifling, but it was also safe. Predictable. No unexplained disappearances. No lurking shadows at the edge of the tree line. Years passed. I'd see reports in the news sometimes, sporadic disappearances in national parks across the country, sightings of strange creatures, never clear photos, never any real proof. But I knew. They never found Ben's body, and they never found that thing, whatever it was. Olympic National Park was shut down indefinitely. Trails were sealed, warnings plastered at every potential entrance. It became a ghost land, a vast expanse of wilderness deemed too dangerous to tread. Hikers and nature lovers cried foul. Petitions circulated, but ultimately, the government stood firm. Too many disappearances, too much inexplicable evidence, and no viable explanation to offer the public. The story spiraled into legend. Conspiracy theories filled the void. Cryptid hunters railed against government cover-ups. The paranormal community declared it a portal to another dimension. The creature became a boogeyman, a campfire story swapped by adrenaline-seeking thrill chasers and wide-eyed children alike. For me, there was no legend, no mystery, only a cold certainty of what lurked out there, a brutal truth that clawed at my sanity. I became a recluse, avoiding the news, wary of crowds. Each face became a blur, a potential mask hiding the eyes of a monster. Time, they say, heals all wounds, but some wounds run too deep, leave scars that never truly fade. Now, 30 years later, I find myself drawn back to the edge of those woods. The barricades still stand, weathered and tagged with graffiti, yet as impregnable as the day they were erected. I come here often, drawn by a force I can't explain. Perhaps it's guilt for surviving when Ben didn't. Perhaps it's a desperate need for closure, for answers to questions that have haunted me for 3 decades. I stand at the edge of the forest, staring into the dense mass of green beyond. My fingers trace the rough outline of the missing person poster that still flutters faintly from the weathered wood. A picture of Ben, smiling, his eyes alive in a way mine haven't been in years. They say the forest calls to you. It does. It's both a whisper and a roar, inviting and threatening, all at once. And as I stand here, feeling the pull of those dark woods, I know that one day I'll answer that call. I'll step past those barriers into the embrace of the trees, seeking the truth I left behind all those years ago. Because the forest keeps its secrets, but it also reveals them to those brave enough or foolish enough to venture into its depths. And I've carried the weight of this secret for far too long. So if you're reading this, know that I've gone back to find Ben, back to face the creature, back to confront the truth that's eluded me for 30 years. And if I don't return, Well, let my story be a warning. The wilderness is vast, and we are small. And there are things out there in the deepest, darkest parts of the world that defy explanation. Things that whisper to us in the rustle of leaves and the creak of ancient trees. Things that wait, patient and hungry, in the shadows. Listen to the whisper of the woods, but beware the roar that follows. My name is Richard Walker, and I'm 70 years old. The events I'm about to recount happened to me in October of 2011, but they haunt me still, their memory as vivid and terrifying as the moment they occurred. I've spent countless sleepless nights reliving those dark days, questioning my sanity, and wondering if I should share this story. But the weight of silence has become too much to bear. The world needs to know what lurks in the shadows of our wilderness. I've been with the National Park Service for over 4 decades now, a career that has spanned some of the most breathtaking landscapes our country has to offer. But it was Redwood National Park that truly captured my heart. There's something about those ancient giants that stirs the soul, makes you feel both insignificant and connected to something greater than yourself. The air is different there, heavy with the scent of damp earth and pine, tinged with the faintest whisper of the nearby Pacific. Most days, my job was a dream come true. I'd wake before dawn, lace up my well-worn boots, and head out into the misty forest. The usual ranger duties kept me busy, maintaining trails, conducting ecological surveys, and occasionally helping a lost hiker find their way back to civilization. I loved every minute of it. Even on the toughest days, the Redwoods had a way of putting things into perspective. Their towering presence a reminder of nature's enduring strength. But perspective can be a dangerous thing when the world you thought you knew turns on its head. It all started with the Richardsons. They were your typical American family. Mom, dad, and 2 teenage kids armed with smartphones and an eagerness to document every moment of their vacation. I remember greeting them at the visitor center, their excitement palpable as they gazed up at the colossal trees surrounding us. You folks planning on hitting any particular trails today? I asked, already reaching for our map of the park's most popular routes. Mrs. Richardson, a petite woman with a warm smile, nodded enthusiastically. We were thinking of trying the Tall Trees Grove. I read it's supposed to be spectacular. I couldn't help but grin. The Tall Trees Grove was indeed a marvel, home to some of the tallest known trees on Earth. You've chosen well, I said, tracing the path on the map. It's about a 4-mile round trip, moderate difficulty. Just make sure you keep to the marked trail and bring plenty of water. Mr. Richardson, a tall man with graying temples, chuckled. Don't worry, Ranger. We've got enough snacks and water to last us a week. If only they had known how prophetic those words would become. I watched them set off down the trail, the kids already engrossed in their phones, no doubt updating their social media status. It was a scene I'd witnessed countless times before, and I thought nothing more of it as I went about my day. 2 days later, the Richardsons' rental car was found in the parking lot, undisturbed. Their hotel room remained untouched, suitcases still packed as if they had just stepped out for a quick hike. The realization that something was terribly wrong settled over the park like a heavy fog. Initially, we treated it as a routine search and rescue operation. Families get turned around in the woods all the time, especially if they stray from the marked paths. But as hours stretched into days, an unsettling feeling began to creep over me. The forest, once a place of wonder and solace, suddenly felt oppressive, its shadows deeper and more menacing than I'd ever noticed before. 5 days into the search, we had found nothing. Not a backpack, not an energy bar wrapper, not even a footprint. It was as if the Richardsons had simply vanished into thin air, swallowed whole by the ancient forest. I was part of the expanded search crew, combing through areas of the park that hadn't seen human activity in years. The work was grueling, both physically and mentally. We pushed through dense undergrowth, scaled steep ravines, and peered into the cavernous hollows of fallen trees. All the while, the redwoods loomed over us, silent sentinels that seemed to be watching our every move. It was on the 6th day that I first noticed something off. I was working my way along a barely there game trail when a chill ran down my spine, raising the hair on the back of my neck. I froze, every instinct screaming that I was being watched. Slowly I turned, scanning the forest around me. Nothing, just the endless sea of massive trunks stretching as far as the eye could see. But the feeling persisted, growing stronger with each passing moment. The forest had gone eerily quiet, the usual chorus of birdsong and rustling leaves replaced by a suffocating silence. I found myself gripping my radio tighter, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. "Base camp, this is Walker," I said, my voice sounding thin and strained even to my own ears. "I'm at grid reference C7. Something's not right out here." Static crackled for a moment before a response came through. "Walker, this is base. Can you clarify? Are you in distress?" I hesitated, suddenly feeling foolish. What was I going to say? That the trees were creeping me out? That I had a bad feeling? I was a seasoned ranger, for crying out loud, not some jumpy rookie on his first solo patrol. "Negative, base," I replied after a moment. "Just checking in. Walker out." I lowered the radio, shaking my head to clear it. But as I turned to continue my search, a flicker of movement caught my eye. It was just at the edge of my vision, a dark shape darting between two massive redwoods. My heart lurched into my throat. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing unnaturally in the still air. "Is someone there?" No response. I took a cautious step forward, straining my eyes to penetrate the gloom between the trees. For a split second, I thought I saw something. A figure, hunched and massive, far larger than any human. But then it was gone, leaving me to wonder if it had ever been there at all. That night, huddled around the campfire with the other search team members, I wasn't the only one with a story to tell. Whispers circulated of odd sounds echoing through the forest, of shadowy figures glimpsed just out of sight. The mood in the camp was tense, a nervous energy crackling beneath the surface of our forced calm. "I'm telling you, I heard something out there," insisted Sarah, one of our newer rangers. Her eyes were wide, darting nervously toward the darkness beyond our circle of light. It was like, I don't know, like a growl, but deeper. It made my whole body shake. Next to her, Mike, a grizzled veteran of countless search and rescue operations, scoffed. "Come on, Sarah, you're letting your imagination run wild. Probably just a bear or something." But I caught the way his hand tightened on his coffee mug, the slight tremor in his voice. Mike was scared too, even if he wouldn't admit it. As the days wore on, the feeling of wrongness only intensified. The forest seemed to close in around us, the towering redwoods no longer majestic, but menacing. Every shadow held the potential for danger. Every unexpected sound sent hearts racing. It was on the 10th day of the search that everything changed. I was paired with Avery Johnson, a fellow ranger I'd known for years. Avery was as solid as they come, level-headed, experienced, with a dry sense of humor that helped keep spirits up even in the toughest situations. We were pushing deeper into the park than any of the other search teams had gone, following a hunch that the Richardsons might have somehow gotten turned around and ended up in one of the more remote areas. The going was tough, the undergrowth dense and unforgiving. "You know," Avery said as we paused to catch our breath, "I'm starting to think those kids might have had the right idea with their phones. GPS would be real handy right about now." I chuckled, grateful for the moment of levity. "What's the matter, Johnson? Don't tell me you're going soft on me in your old age." Avery grinned, but there was a tension around his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Old age, my ass. I could still run circles around you any day of the week." We pressed on, the banter helping to keep the oppressive atmosphere at bay. But as we ventured further into the heart of the forest, That now familiar sense of unease began to creep over me once again. The trees here were older, their massive trunks scarred and gnarled with age. Shafts of sunlight barely penetrated the dense canopy overhead, leaving us in a perpetual twilight. The air felt thick, almost sticky, and carried a musty odor I couldn't quite place. "Hey, Rich," Avery called out, his voice oddly subdued. "You see this?" I made my way over to where he was crouched, examining something on the forest floor. As I drew closer, I felt my blood run cold. There, pressed into the soft earth, was a footprint, but not like any I'd ever seen before. It was massive, easily twice the size of my own boot, with long, claw-like impressions at the end of each toe. The shape was all wrong, too elongated for a bear, too large for any known predator in these parts. "What the hell?" I breathed, dropping to my knees for a closer look. Avery shook his head, his face pale. "I don't know, man, but whatever made this, it's big. And it's close." As if on cue, a sound echoed through the forest, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was like nothing I'd ever heard before, a sound that bypassed all rational thought and struck straight at the most primal part of my brain. Run. Every instinct screamed. Run now. Avery and I locked eyes for a split second, both of us frozen in fear. Then, without a word, we were on our feet, crashing through the underbrush in a blind panic. I lost all sense of direction as we ran, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. The growl came again, louder this time, and closer, much closer. "Rich!" Avery's voice cut through the haze of terror. "We need to split up. It can't follow both of us." Before I could protest, he veered off to the right, disappearing into the gloom. I wanted to call out, to tell him it was a bad idea, but fear had robbed me of my voice. I ran on, my lungs burning, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. The forest blurred around me, the massive redwoods seeming to close in, their branches reaching out like grasping fingers. And then I heard it, Avery's voice crackling over the radio at my hip. "Rich, oh God, Rich, it's here, it's..." His words cut off in a scream that turned my blood to ice. There was a sickening crunch, a wet, tearing sound, and then nothing but static. I stumbled to a halt, my legs giving out beneath me. I collapsed against the base of a massive redwood, gasping for air, my mind reeling from what I had just heard. Avery was gone. My friend, my partner, had just been, what? Killed? Taken by something that shouldn't exist, something that had no place in the rational world I thought I knew. As the realization of what had happened began to sink in, a new sound reached my ears. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps coming closer with each passing second. I pressed myself against the rough bark of the tree, trying to make myself as small as possible. My hand found the butt of my service pistol, but I knew with a certainty that chilled me to my core that it would be useless against whatever was approaching. The footsteps stopped. I could hear breathing now, deep and ragged, just on the other side of the tree. A smell hit me then, an overpowering stench of wet fur and rotting meat that made my stomach heave. Slowly, against every instinct screaming at me to remain still, I turned my head, and there, peering around the trunk of the redwood, was a face that would haunt my nightmares for years to come. It was almost human, but twisted, wrong in ways I couldn't fully comprehend. The eyes were too large, glowing with an unnatural yellow light. The mouth was a gaping maw filled with jagged teeth, a thin line of saliva dripping from its lower lip. For a moment that stretched into eternity, we stared at each other. I saw intelligence in those eyes, a cold, alien intelligence that regarded me with a mixture of curiosity and hunger. Then, with a speed that belied its massive size, it lunged. I don't remember screaming. I don't remember drawing my gun or squeezing the trigger. The next thing I knew, I was running again, blind terror giving me strength I didn't know I possessed. Gunshots rang out behind me, not mine, but others. I heard shouts, the crackle of radios, the sound of something large crashing through the underbrush, and then hands were on me, human hands, pulling me to safety. Voices I recognized, my fellow rangers, members of the search team, but their words were a meaningless blur as they loaded me into a helicopter for emergency evacuation. I caught one last glimpse of the forest. There, just at the edge of the clearing, I saw it again. The creature. It stood, partially hidden behind a massive redwood, those glowing eyes fixed on me with an intensity that chilled me to my very soul. Then the helicopter lifted off, and the thing, whatever it was, melted back into the shadows of the forest. The official report would later state that Avery Johnson died in an animal attack, likely a bear or mountain lion driven to unusual aggression by environmental factors. The Richardsons were never found, their disappearance chalked up to a tragic hiking accident. But I know the truth. We all do. Those of us who were there. Something lives in those woods, something ancient and terrible. Something that should not be. I've told my story many times over the years, to park officials, to therapists, to anyone who would listen. Most dismiss it as the ramblings of a traumatized mind, a coping mechanism to deal with the loss of my friend and my arm. But sometimes late at night, when the wind whispers through the trees outside my window, I think I hear it, that low, rumbling growl that haunts my dreams. And I know with a certainty that chills me to my very core that it's still out there, waiting, watching. And I wonder, not for the first time, if the great redwood forests hide more secrets than we could ever imagine, secrets that perhaps are best left undiscovered. The days following my evacuation passed in a blur of hospital rooms, police interviews, and debriefings with park officials. I drifted in and out of consciousness, my mind reeling from a toxic cocktail of pain medications and traumatic memories. When I was lucid, I tried to tell them what I'd seen, what had happened to Avery, but the words felt hollow, inadequate to describe the horror we'd encountered in those ancient woods. Dr. Elena Patel, the lead physician overseeing my care, listened with a mix of concern and skepticism as I recounted my story for what felt like the 100th time. "Mr. Walker," she said gently, her dark eyes studying me over the rim of her glasses, "I understand you've been through a traumatic experience, but I need you to consider the possibility that your mind may be filling in gaps, so to speak, creating a narrative to make sense of what happened." I shook my head vehemently, wincing as the movement sent a fresh wave of pain through my bandaged shoulder. "You don't understand. I know what I saw, what I heard. That thing, it wasn't natural, and it's still out there." Dr. Patel sighed, making a note on her clipboard. "Richard, you suffered significant blood loss and shock. It's not uncommon for the mind to conjure vivid hallucinations under such circumstances. What you're describing, this creature, it simply doesn't align with any known species." "Because it's not a known species," I snapped, frustration boiling over. "Why won't anyone listen to me?" But even as the words left my mouth, I knew how I must sound. Crazy, delusional. A man driven to the brink by grief and trauma. The days turned to weeks, and slowly my body began to heal. But the nightmares persisted. Every night I found myself back in those woods, running from something I couldn't see, hearing Avery's final terrified scream. I'd wake drenched in sweat, my phantom limb aching where my left arm used to be. As my discharge date approached, I was visited by Marcus Harding, the regional director for the National Park Service. He was a tall, imposing man with a neatly trimmed salt and pepper beard and eyes that seemed to bore right through you. "Richard," he said, settling into the chair beside my hospital bed, "I want you to know that we're taking your account of what happened very seriously. We've had teams combing the area where you and Avery were last seen. So far, they haven't found any evidence to corroborate your story, but we're not giving up." I let out a bitter laugh. "Let me guess, no giant footprints? No sign of the creature?" Harding's expression remained neutral. "We found some unusual tracks, yes, but our wildlife experts believe they could have been made by a large bear, possibly deformed or suffering from some kind of gigantism. As for Avery, He paused, his voice softening. We recovered enough to confirm it was an animal attack, a particularly vicious one. It wasn't a bear, I insisted, my voice barely above a whisper. What I saw, what killed Avery, it was something else, something that shouldn't exist. Harding leaned forward, his eyes meeting mine. Richard, I've known you for years. You're one of our best, most experienced rangers. If you say you saw something out there, I believe you saw something. But we need to be careful about how we proceed. We can't risk causing a panic based on evidence we can't substantiate. I understood what he was saying, even if I didn't like it. The Park Service had a responsibility to the public, to the local economy that depended on tourism. They couldn't very well issue a statement saying there was some kind of monster lurking in the redwoods. What about the Richardsons, I asked. Any sign of them? Harding shook his head. Nothing concrete. We've expanded the search area, brought in cadaver dogs, but it's like they vanished into thin air. As he stood to leave, Harding placed a hand on my shoulder. Get some rest, Richard. When you're ready, we'll talk about your options moving forward. Your job will be waiting for you if you want it. But I knew, with a certainty that settled in my bones, that I could never go back. The thought of those towering redwoods, of what might be lurking in their shadows, filled me with a paralyzing dread. Months passed. I threw myself into physical therapy, learning to navigate the world with one arm. The Park Service offered me a desk job, but I couldn't bring myself to accept. Instead, I took early retirement, retreating to a small cabin on the outskirts of a tiny town in Oregon. I tried to move on, to forget. But the memories haunted me, vivid and terrifying as the day they were formed. I found myself obsessively following news from Redwood National Park, searching for any hint that what I'd encountered might have resurfaced. And then almost a year to the day after my encounter, I received a package. No return address, just my name scrawled in a hasty hand. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a small cloth-wrapped object. The note was brief, written in a shaky script I recognized as belonging to Sarah, the young ranger who had been part of the original search team. Richard, I found this near where we lost Avery. I don't know what it means, but I thought you should have it. Be careful. Something's still out there. Sarah. With trembling fingers, I unwrapped the cloth. What I saw made my blood run cold. It was a tooth, unlike anything I'd ever seen before. Larger than my thumb, wickedly curved and serrated along one edge. It was no bear tooth, no mountain lion fang. This belonged to something else entirely. As I stared at the tooth, a memory surfaced, the creature's face inches from my own, its maw filled with teeth just like this one. In that moment, I knew what I had to do. The truth was out there, hidden in the shadows of those ancient redwoods. And I owed it to Avery, to the Richardsons, to everyone who might unknowingly wander into that creature's territory, to uncover it. The next morning I packed a bag, maps, camping gear, my old service pistol. I knew it was probably suicide to go back, to face that thing again. But I couldn't live with the uncertainty any longer. I needed answers, even if they cost me what was left of my life. As I write these words, I'm preparing to head back into Redwood National Park. I don't know what I'll find there or if I'll make it back out. But if you're reading this, it means I didn't, and it means the danger is real. To whoever finds this account, be warned. There are things in this world that defy explanation. Ancient terrors that lurk just beyond the edge of our understanding, and sometimes they wake up. The redwoods hold secrets, dark, terrible secrets, and I intend to uncover them no matter the cost. This is Richard Walker signing off. If I don't make it back, tell the world what happened here. And whatever you do, be careful in the woods. You never know what might be watching from the shadows. The journal of Richard Walker was discovered 6 months after his disappearance, hidden in a weatherproof container at the base of a massive redwood tree. Despite extensive searches, no trace of Walker himself was ever found. In the years that followed, rumors persisted of strange sightings in Redwood National Park. Hikers reported hearing unusual sounds echoing through the forest at night. Park rangers occasionally found inexplicable tracks or signs of some large, unknown animal moving through the area. But official reports continued to dismiss these accounts, attributing them to known wildlife or overactive imaginations. The disappearances of the Richardson family and Richard Walker were officially classified as tragic accidents, the result of the unforgiving wilderness. Yet for those who have heard Walker's story, who have seen the tooth he left behind, a question lingers. What really lurks in the shadows of the great redwood forests, and when will it emerge again? The ancient trees stand silent, their secrets held close. But in the deepest parts of the forest, where the shadows grow thick and the light struggles to penetrate, something moves, something waits, and the cycle of terror, it seems, is destined to begin anew. I am Charles Fizer, and I am 72 years old. This is my account of the events that unfolded in November 2012, forever changing my life and my perception of reality. I've been with the National Park Service for nearly 10 years, currently working in the vast expanse of Big Bend National Park, down in Texas. I love the desert. It feels different from other places I've worked, a stark, brutal kind of beauty. It took some adjusting after the mountains of Wyoming and the pine forests of Maine, but it's grown on me. That fateful week, I was on backcountry patrol. It's usually one of those stints where it's mainly about reminding lost hikers about hydration protocols and checking that overnight campers are following regulations. Usually uneventful stuff, but necessary. This time of year, the heat gets fierce, and you want to head off trouble before it starts. Around midday on the third day, I got a radio transmission that sent a chill down my spine, a possible missing person report from a worried family member. The description made my blood run cold. A middle-aged couple, experienced hikers out on the South Rim Trail for 2 days and hadn't chin as scheduled. It was a tough trail, gaining over 2,000 feet in elevation. Plenty of spots where an unlucky slip or a heat-induced stumble could cause problems. I knew the South Rim well, having tackled it a bunch of times myself for the views and the sense of accomplishment. With a growing sense of unease, I drove out to the trailhead, gathered what details I could from the distraught daughter, and started my solo search. I was familiar with the protocol. Look for signs of deviation from the trail, gear, anything out of the ordinary, and radio for backup once the situation was assessed. The first few miles yielded nothing, just a well-maintained trail, a few other hikers who reported nothing amiss, and the usual sprawl of cacti and scrub brush under that merciless desert sun. Then I rounded a bend and saw it, a backpack, ripped open and abandoned near a rocky outcropping. A surge of dread washed over me as I recognized the brand, the same one described by the couple's daughter. My hands shook as I radioed for backup, the words tight in my throat. It was more than a lost hiker situation now. Something bad had happened out here. I approached the outcrop cautiously, rifle drawn, the silence broken only by the rasp of my own breath. And there they were, or rather, what was left of them. It was a slaughterhouse. Blood-splattered rocks, shattered bones, shreds of clothing snagged on thorns. I stumbled back, a wave of nausea threatening to overwhelm me. It wasn't an animal attack, nothing remotely normal. The injuries were grotesque, violent beyond anything I'd ever witnessed, even after all my years as a ranger. It was as though some impossibly powerful creature had torn them apart with brutal, frenzied rage. My mind reeled, unable to process the horror before me. Backup arrived an agonizing hour later. A forensics team, a grim-faced crew of fellow rangers, and the inevitable park higher-ups trying to contain the damage the gruesome discovery would cause. They questioned me, scrutinized my account, the unspoken suspicion hovering in the overheated air. Ranger loses it in the desert. creates a gruesome scene for some twisted reason. I didn't blame them. The crime scene defied belief. I knew how insane it sounded. But I also knew what I saw. The nights that followed were a nightmare blur. Snatches of images haunted me, gleaming yellow eyes in the desert darkness, the guttural roar that echoed in the barren canyons, the way the searchlight swept over the rocks, highlighting the blood but never finding whatever made those monstrous wounds. I started sleeping with a loaded gun under my pillow, jumping at every creaking floorboard, every flicker of headlights outside my window. Finally, word came down. The official cause of death: animal attack. Perpetrator unknown. Case closed. Just like that. The evidence, they said, was inconclusive. The injuries not inconsistent with some unknown predator defending its territory. They buried the couple in the dusty cemetery on the outskirts of the park, another grim statistic of wilderness that can never be fully tamed. But I saw the hesitation in the eyes of the forensic specialist, heard the whispers shared around campfires when they thought I was out of earshot. The other rangers, the ones I'd worked side by side with for years, started giving me a wide berth. I was the one touched by the unexplainable, tainted by an experience they couldn't even begin to fathom. My protests felt hollow. My insistence on something out there, something monstrous, landed not with the urgency of truth, but with the echoes of a mind starting to unravel in the wake of trauma. I'm writing this from a motel room in some nameless town on the edge of the desert, a few hastily packed belongings stuffed into my weathered old duffel bag. I handed in my resignation this morning. I can't stay here, not with that constant gnawing dread coiling in my gut like a venomous snake. I can't stay and risk it coming for me next. They can dismiss the horror, write their reports, explain it all away with neat bureaucratic phrases. But out there, in the vast expanse where the sun casts dark shadows and the wind whispers through the canyons, something lurks, something unnatural. And after what I saw, I think it knows where to find me. I don't know where I'll go or how long I can keep running. Maybe I'll head north, lose myself in the anonymous sprawl of a big city where the worst predators walk on two legs. Maybe I'm being paranoid. Maybe I did somehow manufacture those horrors in a mind pushed past its breaking point by the relentless desert and the brutal solitude. It doesn't matter. Every rustle of leaves, every flicker of shadow sets off a jolt of adrenaline in my veins, makes me picture those impossibly large clawed feet, that gaping, monstrous maw dripping with, I think I heard a noise outside my room. I'll go check. The floorboards creaked beneath my boots, every sound amplified in the echoing silence of the cheap motel room. I moved towards the window, my grip tightening on the gun. Something was there, a flicker of movement just beyond the faded yellow curtain. My gut clenched, a scream caught in my throat. It couldn't have tracked me down. I closed my eyes for a split second, a futile attempt at gathering my shattered composure. No point in hiding, no use in cowering. I tore open the curtain, braced for anything. Empty. The dusty parking lot, silent and still under the harsh fluorescent lights, stretched out before me. A battered pickup truck hummed in the distance, a lone figure hunched over the wheel. Ordinary. My pulse hammered in my ears as relief crashed over me, followed swiftly by a wave of shame. I was losing it, seeing threats in every shadow, my nerves frayed beyond repair. But then a movement caught my eye. On the edge of the parking lot, where a stand of mesquite trees cast long skeletal shadows, a figure was watching. Too tall, too thin, standing unnaturally still in the harsh light, and as it turned its head toward me, moonlight gleamed on two impossibly bright yellow eyes. My breath caught. It was him. It, the creature. It was here, in this nondescript nowhere town. It had found me. This was the end. A bitter resignation washed over me, replacing the frantic terror. I couldn't run anymore. I raised my gun, more in defiance than in any real belief that it would have an effect. The creature observed me, no sign of fear in its inhuman glare, only a cold, calculating intelligence. It took a step forward, a sinuous, unhurried movement that belied its grotesque shape. With each step, the details became chillingly clear. The ragged, mottled fur draped over its hulking frame, the impossibly long limbs tipped with sickle claws designed for tearing. Its head was like a nightmarish fusion of wolf and something else, all teeth and predatory instinct. A low growl rumbled from its throat. I fired a warning shot, more of a plea than a threat. The report shattered the night. The creature flinched but didn't retreat. It was toying with me, its hunter's instinct playing out this cruel game to the bitter end. I fired again and again. At first, it seemed as though the bullets had no effect, simply angering it further. But then it let out a shriek, a sound of rage and pain that echoed off the crumbling walls of the motel. A thin trickle of blood, eerily black in the moonlight, seeped from a wound on its massive shoulder. A flicker of something like hope ignited in me. It wasn't invincible. It could be hurt. Maybe even... My desperate thoughts were cut off as the creature charged, a blur of claws and fangs. I managed to get another shot off before it slammed into me, sending both of us crashing against the flimsy wall. Its stench enveloped me, rotting meat, something feral. I kicked out wildly, trying to dislodge it. The force of its impact had knocked the breath out of me, stars bursting in my vision. With a strength born of desperation, I fumbled for the discarded gun, my fingers slipping in the creature's hot, foul blood. The motel room door burst open, and the startled face of an elderly night clerk peered in. He screamed, a shrill sound that pierced the chaos, then turned and ran, his flimsy slippers slapping against the cracked concrete. The distraction was all I needed. The creature, momentarily startled by the noise, twisted its monstrous head. I seized the gun, jamming the barrel against its matted fur, and fired again. The reports echoed in the confined space, deafening me as the creature roared in agony. It thrashed, clawing at its face, its movements becoming less focused. Frantic. I scrambled away, dragging myself across the debris-strewn parking lot, the creature's pained snarls fading behind me. I didn't know how badly I'd injured it, whether it would pursue me. But blind instinct propelled me forward. Stumbling into the battered pickup, I fumbled for the keys, my hands shaking. I barely got it started before the motel room door exploded outward. The creature's immense form silhouetted against the now empty doorway. It staggered then, with one final chilling glare in my direction. It turned and vanished into the shadows beneath the mesquite trees. I drove through the night, fueled by adrenaline and lingering terror. The headlights cut a swath across endless highway, the monotony both terrifying and comforting. Every creak of the old truck, every flicker of movement in the rearview mirror sent my heart pounding anew. My side ached and my head throbbed, but I couldn't stop. Not until I was far, far away from the desolate stretch of desert and the motel parking lot marked with blood. By dawn, I'd crossed state lines and abandoned the truck in a nondescript suburb. A bus heading north seemed as good a destination as any. I sank into the worn seat, trying in vain to ignore the stares directed at my disheveled appearance, the dark circles under my eyes, and the gun I still clutched with numb fingers. The landscape passed in a blur as I tried to process what had happened. A part of me, a fading fragment of rationality, clung to the hope that it had all been a psychotic break, a final descent into PTSD-fueled madness. The news report a week later shattered that illusion. A headline screamed from a tattered newspaper left on a neighboring bus seat. The photo, grainy and horrific, showed a campsite ravaged in a sickening echo of the scene that started my nightmare. My trembling hands dropped the paper. They'd covered it up again, contained the impossible within the safety of the explainable. I bought a ticket back to the desert town, back to the motel room, littered with evidence of the impossible struggle. The room was untouched, a shrine to a horror nobody else believed. I packed my meager belongings, an unsettling determination forming within me. It's out there, and others will die because of the lies and the cover-ups. Maybe I'm crazy, maybe I'm the only one who sees it for what it truly is. But I won't let them dismiss what happened. I won't let them bury the truth along with the broken bodies it leaves in its wake. I can't stay. Each rustle of wind through the mesquite, each creak of the aging floorboards is a whisper of its presence. But I won't disappear quietly into the faceless oblivion of the city either. I know where to go, know the vast, shadowy places where it hunts. I won't live in fear. I'll become the hunter.
My name is James Wilson, and I'm 58 years old. What I'm about to tell you happened a few years back when I was still a park ranger at Whispering Pine State Forest in northern Michigan. Now, I wasn't new to the job. I'd been patrolling the trails and keeping an eye out for lost hikers for over 2 decades. It's not the kind of gig you do for the money, but more for the love of the outdoors and the peace it brings. My friends used to joke that I should have been born a century earlier, out there trapping and exploring like the old mountain men. Whispering Pines was a vast expanse of towering evergreens, crystal clear lakes, and rugged terrain. It attracted thousands of visitors each year, from casual day trippers to hardcore backpackers looking to test their mettle against nature. I'd seen it all over the years: lost kids, injured hikers, and even the occasional bear encounter, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened that autumn. It started innocently enough. Late September brought a chill to the air and painted the forest in a breathtaking array of reds, oranges, and golds. Tourists flocked to the park to witness the spectacle, and we rangers were kept busy ensuring everyone stayed safe and followed the rules. My partner, Mia Rodriguez, and I had just finished our morning briefing when the first report came in. James, Mia, our supervisor Max Mulligan called out as we were heading to our patrol vehicles. Got a missing hiker reported near Beaver Creek. Family says he went out yesterday afternoon and never made it back to the campsite. Can you two check it out? It wasn't an unusual request. Hikers sometimes got turned around or decided to camp out an extra night without letting anyone know. Mia and I headed out expecting a routine search and rescue operation. We found the missing hiker, Daniel Bradshaw, about 3 miles off the main trail. He was dehydrated and a bit scratched up, but otherwise fine. What struck me as odd was his insistence that he'd been chased off the trail by something he couldn't quite describe. It was big, James, Daniel said, his eyes wide and voice trembling. Bigger than any bear I've ever seen, and fast. God, it was so fast. I chalked it up to dehydration and fear playing tricks on his mind. We got him back to his family and thought that was the end of it, but it was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, we had an unusual spike in reports about people going missing. Now, that's not entirely unheard of. Folks get lost or injured, and sometimes they wander off the trails thinking they're invincible. But this was different. The disappearances weren't adding up, and the unease in the community was palpable. I remember joking to Mia one crisp November morning, maybe Bigfoot's finally decided to vacation in Michigan. But deep down, I was worried. Something didn't feel right in the forest I'd called home for so long. It all came to a head on a brisk, late October day. The air was crisp, and the leaves were a fiery palette of reds and oranges. I was supposed to meet up with Mia for a routine check of the trails. We always split up and covered different sections to make the rounds quicker. That day, I was assigned to the northern part of the forest, an area not frequented much by tourists. Mia didn't show up at our usual meeting spot. I waited for a good hour, thinking she might have gotten caught up with something. I tried calling her on the radio, but there was no response. So I figured I'd start without her. She was probably fine, I told myself, maybe helping a lost hiker or dealing with some minor emergency. I was about 2 hours into my patrol when I noticed something off. There was this smell. something putrid and metallic, like rusted iron mixed with decaying leaves. My first thought was maybe an animal had died nearby, but the forest has its way of cleaning up after itself. This smell was different, almost unnatural. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to follow the scent. After all, it's part of my job to check for anything out of the ordinary. I found a small clearing, and that's where I saw it, Mia's ranger hat on the ground, covered in what looked like blood. My heart dropped into my stomach. There was no sign of Mia, just the hat and a few scattered tools she usually carried. This wasn't a simple case of getting lost. Something bad had happened. I radioed for backup, but the response was crackly and full of static. Vance Trail. Need. Was all I could make out. I had no choice but to investigate further. I felt a sense of dread creeping in, but I pushed it aside. Mia was out there, and she needed help. I followed a faint trail of blood leading deeper into the woods. My mind raced through 100 different scenarios, none of them good. The trail led me to an old rundown cabin. I knew about this place. It was abandoned years ago and left to rot. No one ever came out here, not even the most adventurous hikers. The door was ajar, and inside it was dark, the kind of darkness that eats up the daylight. I called out for Mia, but there was no response. I stepped inside, and the smell hit me like a wall. It was stronger here, almost suffocating. That's when I saw it. In the dim light filtering through the broken windows, I could make out a figure slumped in the corner. It was Mia. Her body was mangled, almost unrecognizable, and there were deep gashes all over her. I felt a wave of nausea, but forced it down. I had to stay focused. Before I could process what I was seeing, I heard a noise from behind me. I turned around, and there it was, the creature. It was tall, easily over 7 feet, with long limbs and pale, almost translucent skin. Its eyes were the most unsettling part, black and void-like, as if looking into nothingness. It didn't move at first, just stood there, staring at me. I reached for my sidearm, but the creature lunged before I could draw it. The next few moments were a blur of terror and adrenaline. The thing was unnaturally quick. It swiped at me with claws that seemed to extend from its fingers, tearing through my jacket and into my flesh. Somehow I managed to land a hit on its arm with my flashlight, and it let out a sound that was more of a hiss than a scream. It recoiled, giving me just enough time to scramble out of the cabin and into the woods. I didn't look back, just ran as fast as I could, blood dripping from my wounds and adrenaline pumping through my veins. I don't know how long I ran, but eventually I collapsed from exhaustion and blood loss. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. They told me a couple of hikers found me unconscious near one of the main trails and brought me in. My wounds were severe, but I was lucky to be alive. The official report said Mia was attacked by a bear, but I knew better. I told them what I saw, but they dismissed it as shock and trauma. Who would believe a story like mine? A 7-foot-tall creature in the woods. It sounded insane even to me. I couldn't go back to the forest after that. I took a desk job with the State Parks Department in Lansing, away from the trees and the memories. But I never forgot. Sometimes in the quiet of the night, I think about Mia and that creature. It's still out there, I'm sure of it. They never found any more bodies after that, and the disappearances stopped. Maybe it moved on, or maybe it's just waiting. I don't know. All I know is that I'll never set foot in those woods again. The cabin was eventually torn down, and life in the nearby towns returned to normal, or as normal as it could be. People moved on, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we hadn't seen the last of it. That creature, whatever it was, left a mark on me, a reminder of the things that lurk in the dark corners of our world. Mia's family deserved the truth, but how could I explain what really happened? They held a small memorial for her, and I attended, feeling like a fraud for not being able to save her. Her husband, Mike, looked at me with eyes full of questions I couldn't answer. Their two teenage kids, Anna and Liam, stood silently by their father's side, their faces a mixture of grief and confusion. I tried to go back to my life, but the nightmares followed me. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, reliving that moment in the cabin. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Amelia Chen, but even she seemed at a loss when I described the creature. Maybe it was a manifestation of your trauma, she suggested. But I knew what I saw was real. Months passed and I settled into my new routine in Lansing. The desk job was mind-numbingly boring compared to my days as a ranger, but it was safe. No unexplained creatures, no life or death situations, just paperwork and meetings. I thought I was starting to move on, to put the horror behind me. Then, one night in late March, I got a call from another ranger, Marcus Johnson. He was an old friend and one of the few people who didn't treat me like I was crazy after what happened. Marcus was now stationed at Whispering Pines, taking over my old position. "James," he said, his voice tense. "Something's happening here. A hiker's gone missing in the same area where you found Mia. The search party found strange markings on the trees, and there's this smell, like iron and decay." I felt my blood run cold. I knew then that it was back, or maybe it had never left. I told Marcus to be careful and hung up the phone, my heart heavy with dread. I knew I couldn't stay away any longer. I owed it to Mia, to the missing hiker, and to everyone who set foot in those woods. Against my better judgment, I packed my gear, including a gun this time, and headed back to Whispering Pines. As I drove through the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was a terrible idea, but I had to do it. I had to face it, whatever it was. I met up with Marcus at the ranger station just as dawn was breaking. The familiar smell of pine and damp earth brought back a flood of memories, both good and bad. Marcus filled me in on the details of the missing hiker, a 28-year-old woman named Alison Cooper, last seen 2 days ago near Beaver Creek. We set out to search the northern part of the forest, the area where I'd had my encounter months before. It was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that makes your skin crawl. We reached the clearing where I'd found Mia's hat, and that's when we saw it. The creature was there, standing in the shadows of the trees, watching us. Marcus raised his gun, but I knew it wouldn't be that easy. The creature moved with a speed that defied logic, and before I could react, it was upon us. Marcus fired, but the bullets seemed to have little effect. The creature slashed at him with its long, razor-sharp claws, and he went down with a scream. I aimed my gun and fired, hitting it in the chest. It staggered back, and I took the opportunity to grab Marcus and run. We didn't stop until we reached the main trail, where a group of early morning hikers found us and called for help. Marcus was in bad shape, but he survived. The creature had disappeared into the woods, and was leaving us with more questions than answers. The official report once again blamed a bear, but I knew the truth. The creature was still out there, waiting for its next victim. I couldn't stay silent any longer. I wrote down everything I remembered, every detail of both encounters, and sent it to the local paper, the Whispering Pines Gazette. To my surprise, they published my story. It caused quite a stir in the community. Some people believed me, sharing their own strange experiences in the forest. Others dismissed it as the ravings of a traumatized man. But it didn't matter. What mattered was that the truth was out there. The forest was no longer just a place of beauty and peace. It held secrets, dark and terrible, that needed to be exposed. I never went back to being a park ranger. The memories were too painful, the fear too real. But I found a new purpose. I started a support group for people who had experienced unexplained phenomena in the wilderness. We met twice a month in a small community center in Lansing. At first it was just a handful of us, me, Marcus, once he recovered, and a few others who had read my story and reached out. But as word spread, our numbers grew. There was Lisa, a wildlife photographer who swore she'd seen something matching my description in the forests of northern Minnesota. and a retired geologist who had encountered strange, inexplicable phenomena during his expeditions in remote areas. Each story was different, but they all shared a common thread, the feeling that there was something out there, something beyond our understanding. I also started giving talks at local schools and community centers, not about the creature specifically, but about wilderness safety and the importance of respecting nature. I couldn't bring myself to scare kids with tales of monsters, but I could teach them how to stay safe, how to be prepared, and most importantly, how to trust their instincts when something doesn't feel right. As the years passed, the memories of that night in the cabin never faded, but they became easier to bear. I found solace in helping others and in knowing that I had done what I could to warn people about the dangers lurking in the wild places of the world. To this day, I still wonder what that creature was and where it came from. Was it some kind of undiscovered species, a government experiment gone wrong, or something even more inexplicable? I don't have the answers, and maybe I never will. But I do know this. The world is vast and mysterious, and there are things out there that defy explanation. My experience changed me forever, opened my eyes to a reality I never knew existed. And while I can't go back to the person I was before, I found a way to move forward, to use my experience to help others, and maybe, just maybe, prevent someone else from going through what I did. As I sit here in my small apartment in Lansing, looking out at the city lights, I can't help but think of Whispering Pines. The forest is still there, still beautiful, still drawing visitors from all over. But now, when the wind blows through the trees carrying the scent of pine and earth, I imagine I can hear something else. A whisper, a warning, a reminder that in the depths of the wilderness there are secrets best left undiscovered. And yet, part of me knows that as long as that creature is out there, as long as there's a chance it might hurt someone else, I'll never truly be at peace. So I keep telling my story, keep helping those who've had similar experiences, and keep hoping that someday we'll understand what's really out there in the shadows of the forest. Until then, I'll be here, ready to listen, ready to help, and always, always watching the trees. My name is Robert Noason, and at 67 years old, I've seen my fair share of the world. For the past 18 years, I've been working as a park ranger, a job that's allowed me to embrace my lifelong love for the great outdoors. Growing up in a small town nestled in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, I spent my childhood exploring the forests and streams that surrounded my home. Now I find myself stationed in the stunning Hocking Hills region of Ohio, a place of breathtaking beauty and, as I've come to learn, deep mystery. It was last year when everything changed. The events that unfolded in those dense woods have left an indelible mark on my psyche, altering my perception of the natural world I thought I knew so well. On that fateful day, I set out on what should have been a routine patrol with my fellow rangers, Sarah Conn, Kate, and David Reeves. We'd been grappling with an uptick in reports of lost hikers and even a few missing persons cases. While it wasn't uncommon for inexperienced visitors to underestimate the wilderness, there was something different about these incidents. A shared unease had settled over our team, a feeling that something was amiss in our normally peaceful park. We began our patrol just as the sun was peeking over the horizon, its warm light barely penetrating the lingering fog that clung to the treetops. The air was crisp, carrying the earthy scent of damp leaves and pine. As we made our way deeper into the forest, the sounds of nature surrounded us, the melodious songs of waking birds, the soft rustling of small animals in the underbrush. David, always wanting to lighten the mood, quipped, "Hey Ron, you think Bigfoot's behind all these missing folks?" We shared a laugh, unaware of how eerily close to the truth his jest would prove to be, albeit in a way none of us could have imagined. As we pressed on, we found ourselves in a particularly dense section of the forest. The ancient trees towered above us, their gnarled roots creating a treacherous obstacle course on the forest floor. The canopy was so thick here that it almost completely blocked out the sunlight, casting everything in a perpetual twilight. Despite having a map of the area, it was clear that this part of the woods hadn't been thoroughly explored or documented. It was in this shadowy realm that we stumbled upon our first clue, an old weather-beaten backpack, half buried beneath a thick layer of fallen leaves. Sarah carefully picked it up, her brow furrowing as she examined its contents. "There's nothing in here but some mouldy clothes and a wallet," she reported, her voice tinged with concern. The wallet contained an ID belonging to a man named Richard Simmons, who had been reported missing nearly a decade ago. A chill ran down my spine as I realized the implications of our discovery. We marked the location and pressed on, our senses now hyper-alert to our surroundings. After what felt like hours of trekking through the increasingly wild terrain, we came across an abandoned campsite. It looked as though it hadn't been touched in years. A fire pit filled with ashes, long since cold, rusted cooking utensils scattered about, and the tattered remains of what was once a tent. The scene before us seemed frozen in time, preserved in the perpetual gloom of the deep woods. David muttered under his breath, "This is starting to feel like something out of a horror movie." None of us could disagree with his assessment. As we were about to move on, Sarah called us over. She had found a notebook, its pages warped and stained by years of exposure to the elements. With gloved hands, I carefully opened it, struggling to decipher the faded and often illegible writing. Most of the entries were indecipherable, but a few stood out with chilling clarity. Richard had written about seeing something in the woods, a tall, thin figure with impossibly long limbs and eyes that seemed to glow in the darkness. He described hearing strange noises at night, like whispers carried on the wind, always just on the edge of comprehension. The last few entries became increasingly frantic and disjointed, painting a picture of a man whose grip on reality was slowly unraveling. We decided it was time to head back to the ranger station and regroup. On our return journey, we encountered more unsettling evidence. Scraps of clothing caught on branches, a broken watch lying face down in the mud, and most disturbingly, what appeared to be fragments of bones scattered among the leaf litter. While we couldn't be certain they were human remains, the possibility was enough to set our nerves on edge. Back at the station, we reported our findings to the local authorities. They promised to send out a search team, but we all knew that wouldn't be enough. Whatever was happening in our woods, it was clear that we needed to take action ourselves. We agreed to venture out again the next day, this time better prepared and armed for whatever we might encounter. As dawn broke, we geared up for our return to the forest. I carried my trusty rifle, David armed himself with a shotgun, and Sarah holstered a pistol at her hip. The weight of the weapons did little to ease the growing sense of dread that had settled over us. Retracing our steps from the previous day, we made our way back into the heart of the woods. The forest seemed different now, more menacing. The usual chorus of birdsong and rustling leaves was conspicuously absent, replaced by an oppressive silence that seemed to swallow up every sound we made. Upon reaching the abandoned campsite once more, we made the decision to split up, each taking a different direction to cover more ground. In hindsight, it was a decision we would come to regret. I headed east, pushing deeper into the uncharted areas of the forest. The trees here grew so close together that I often had to turn sideways to squeeze between their massive trunks. The air grew thick and heavy, filled with an earthy, almost primordial scent that seemed to clog my nostrils. I'm not sure how long I had been walking when I first caught sight of it. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light filtering through the leaves, a tall, impossibly thin figure standing motionless among the trees. But then it moved, with a quickness that defied belief, almost too fast for my eyes to track. My heart pounding, I called out over the radio, "Sarah, David, are you seeing this?" All I got in response was static. Against my better judgment, I decided to follow the figure, keeping my rifle at the ready. It led me to a small clearing, and that's when I saw it up close for the first time. The creature, for I could no longer pretend it was anything else, was vaguely humanoid in shape but unmistakably alien. Its skin was a sickly pale color, almost translucent, stretched taut over an impossibly thin frame. But it was the eyes that truly chilled me to my core, glowing with an unnatural, otherworldly light. Where a face should have been, there was only a smooth, featureless surface, broken only by those terrible glowing eyes. Before I could even think to raise my rifle, it lunged at me with inhuman speed. The impact knocked the wind from my lungs and sent me sprawling to the forest floor. I scrambled to my feet, firing wildly as the creature darted around the clearing. My shots seemed to have little effect. Where they connected, instead of blood, a thick black ichor oozed from the wounds. The battle that ensued felt like it lasted an eternity. I emptied my rifle, reloaded, and fired again and again. The creature was relentless, its attacks growing more frenzied with each passing moment. Just when I thought my strength would give out, it suddenly retreated, melting back into the shadows of the forest as quickly as it had appeared. Battered, bruised, and gasping for breath, I radioed Sarah and David, telling them to meet me back at the campsite. When we regrouped, I recounted my harrowing encounter. David was skeptical at first, but the genuine fear in my voice and my obvious injuries were enough to convince him. Sarah, who had always been more open to the unexplained, believed me without question. We made our way back to the ranger station, our minds reeling from the implications of what had happened. We knew we couldn't leave that thing out there, especially if it was responsible for the missing hikers. But we also knew we were ill-equipped to handle such a threat on our own. That night, sleep eluded us. We sat around the table in the station, poring over maps and debating our options. David suggested calling in reinforcements from other parks or even the military, but we knew that would take too much time. In the end, we decided to go back out at first light, this time with a plan to trap the creature. As dawn broke, we set out once more, our gear supplemented with hastily constructed traps and bait. We returned to the area where I had encountered the creature and set up our snares, then settled in to wait. Hours passed with no sign of our quarry. Just as we were about to give up, we heard it, a low, guttural sound that was part growl, part something entirely inhuman. The creature appeared at the edge of the clearing, those eerie glowing eyes fixed upon us with what I can only describe as malevolent intelligence. We stood our ground, weapons at the ready as it began to move toward our traps. For a moment, I dared to hope that our plan would work, but the creature was far more cunning than we had given it credit for. It nimbly avoided our traps and came straight for us with frightening speed. We opened fire, the sound of our weapons deafening in the quiet of the forest. Our bullets seemed to slow it down but not stop it entirely. It reached David first, its elongated fingers slashing at him with razor-sharp precision. He went down with a scream of agony. Sarah and I continued firing, trying desperately to drive it away from our fallen comrade. The creature turned its attention to Sarah next, knocking her to the ground with a sweeping blow. In that moment of desperation, I took careful aim and fired at its head, praying to hit something vital. The shot connected, and the creature stumbled backward, giving me just enough time to grab Sarah and pull her to safety. David was bleeding profusely, but still alive. We retreated as quickly as we could, half carrying, half dragging David between us. To our immense relief, the creature did not pursue us. It stood at the edge of the clearing, those glowing eyes watching our retreat with an almost contemplative air. We made it back to the station and immediately called for emergency medical evacuation. David was airlifted to the nearest hospital, his condition critical but stable. In the days and weeks that followed, an extensive search was conducted in the area, but no trace of the creature was ever found. The authorities, unable or unwilling to accept our fantastic story, officially attributed the incident to an attack by an unidentified large predator, possibly a bear. But we knew the truth. We knew what we had seen, what we had fought against in those dark woods, and we knew it was still out there, lurking in the shadows. David survived his injuries, but he was never quite the same afterward. The trauma of the attack left deep psychological scars, and he eventually transferred to a less demanding position at the park's visitor center. Sarah stuck it out for a few months, but ultimately decided to leave her job as a ranger altogether. She moved to Columbus, taking a position with the state's Environmental Protection Agency, as far from the deep woods as she could get while still working in conservation. As for me, I couldn't bring myself to leave. This forest, for better or worse, had become a part of me. I felt a responsibility to stay, to keep watch, to make sure that thing, whatever it was, didn't claim any more victims. Life in the park goes on. We've repaired and expanded the trail system, put up new warning signs, and implemented stricter protocols for hikers venturing into the backcountry. But deep down, I know it's not enough. That creature is still out there somewhere in the vast expanse of Hocking Hills. I've thought about quitting more times than I can count, about finding a nice, safe job far away from any forest. But this place, this calling, it's in my blood now. So I stay. Despite the fear, despite the memories that haunt my dreams, I stay. Because someone has to keep watch. Someone has to make sure it doesn't take anyone else. I still have Richard Simmons' notebook locked away in my desk drawer. Sometimes on particularly dark nights when the wind whispers through the trees outside my cabin, I take it out and reread his frantic scribblings. I search for some clue, some insight into what that creature might be and where it came from. But the answers remain elusive, lost in the ramblings of a man whose mind was fracturing under the weight of an impossible reality. These days, when I'm out on patrol, I keep my eyes and ears open, always alert, always watching. Sometimes, when I'm deep in the woods alone, I think I can hear it, a rustle in the undergrowth, a shadow that seems to move just at the edge of my vision. It's probably just my imagination playing tricks on me, the result of that traumatic encounter. But I can't shake the feeling that it's out there, watching, waiting. And so, I continue my vigil. I walk the trails, I warn the visitors, and I keep my rifle close at hand. Because I know that somewhere in these ancient woods, in the deepest, darkest hollow where the sun never quite reaches, something is waiting. Something with glowing eyes and an otherworldly hunger. And as long as I draw breath, I'll be here, standing guard against the watcher in the woods. My name is Luke Price, and I've been a park ranger for the last 10 years. At 66 years old, I've seen more than my fair share of strange occurrences in the wilderness, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened last fall in the Mount Baker Snoqualmie National Forest. Growing up in rural Washington, I spent more time among the towering evergreens than inside my family's modest home. It seemed only natural to turn my love for the outdoors into a career. The Pacific Northwest has always been my home, its misty forests and rugged mountains a constant source of wonder and respect. I've encountered many things during my tenure as a ranger, from lost hikers to aggressive wildlife, but the events of last October shook me to my core. It's the kind of tale you'd expect to hear around a campfire, but I swear on my life that every word of this is true. It all began on what should have been a routine patrol. The area I work in is vast and largely untouched, a sprawling wilderness that can swallow you whole if you're not careful. That day I was partnered with Rita Cho, a fellow ranger and good friend. Rita's a compact woman with a sharp wit and an even sharper eye for detail. We'd been called out to investigate reports of strange noises coming from deep within the forest. As we drove our battered Forest Service truck along the winding dirt roads, Rita couldn't resist a bit of playful speculation. "So, Luke," she said with a grin, "think we're on the trail of Sasquatch today?" I chuckled, shaking my head. "Nah, probably just some campers who had one too many and got spooked by an owl. You know how it goes." We reached the trailhead and began our hike into the dense forest. The woods were unnaturally quiet, the silence hanging heavy in the air like a thick fog. It was odd, but I brushed it off as just another quirk of the forest. After about an hour of hiking, we came across the campsite where the noises had been reported. What we found made my blood run cold. The site was in complete disarray. Tents were shredded, food and gear scattered everywhere as if a tornado had torn through. But there was no sign of the campers themselves. "Luke, look at this," Rita called, kneeling by some unusual tracks in the soft earth. They were like nothing I'd ever seen before, large, deep impressions with what looked like claw marks at the edges. "Those aren't bear tracks," I muttered, crouching down for a closer look. "Too big. And the stride, it's almost like whatever made these was walking on two legs." We decided to follow the tracks more out of a sense of duty than any real desire to see where they led. The path took us deeper into the forest, where the trees grew so dense they blotted out most of the sunlight. The air grew colder, and an uneasy feeling settled in the pit of my stomach. "Luke," Rita whispered, her voice tense, "do you ever get the feeling we're being watched?" I nodded grimly. "Yeah, I'm feeling it now." The forest seemed alive with shadows and movements just beyond our peripheral vision, but we pressed on, determined to solve the mystery. The tracks led us to a small clearing, and what we found there made my skin crawl. There were more tracks, many more, and in the center of the clearing, a large mound of earth had been disturbed. It looked as if something had been buried and then dug up again. "We need to call this in," I said, my voice tight with urgency. Rita nodded, her usual cheerful demeanor replaced by grim determination. "Agreed. This is way above our pay grade." As we turned to leave, a sound stopped us in our tracks. It was a low, guttural noise, almost like a growl, but not quite like any animal I'd ever heard. We froze, listening intently. The sound came again, closer this time. Rita reached for her radio to call for backup, but before she could, something burst from the trees. The creature that emerged was like nothing I'd ever seen or imagined. It stood easily 7 feet tall with a hunched posture and long, gangly limbs. Its skin was a sickly pale color stretched tight over its bones, and its eyes, its eyes, glowed a nauseating yellow in the dim light. The creature moved with an unnatural grace, almost gliding across the ground toward us. For a moment we stood paralyzed with fear. Then instinct kicked in. "Run!" I shouted, and we took off back down the trail. We didn't stop until we reached the truck, our lungs burning and hearts pounding. We radioed in our report as we sped back to headquarters, but by the time backup arrived, there was no sign of the creature. The tracks were gone, and the campsite looked just as we'd left it, with no evidence of the horror we'd witnessed. Our supervisor, Marcus Blackwood, listened to our story with obvious skepticism. "You two sure you didn't just spook each other out there?" he asked, tone more mocking than concerned. "Marcus, we know what we saw," Rita insisted, her voice firm despite her obvious exhaustion. "That thing is out there." "Well, until we have more than a wild story and some weird tracks, there's not much we can do," Marcus replied with a shrug. "But I'll keep this on record, just in case." Days passed, and things seemed to return to normal. But Rita and I couldn't shake the memory of what we'd seen. We kept a watchful eye during our patrols, half expecting the creature to appear again at any moment. Then, a couple of weeks later, a hiker went missing. Her name was Sophia Chen, an experienced backpacker who'd been hiking alone in the same area where we'd encountered the creature. Search teams were dispatched, but there was no trace of her. Rita and I joined the search, hoping against hope that we wouldn't find any more of those unnatural tracks. As we combed through the dense undergrowth, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched again. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and every snapping twig or rustle of leaves made me jump. "Luke, over here," Rita's voice cut through my nervous thoughts. I hurried over to where she was standing near a rocky outcropping. There, half buried under leaves and dirt, was a torn piece of fabric. It matched the description of the shirt Sophia had been wearing when she disappeared. We radioed in our find, and the search intensified in that area. Hours passed with no other signs, and as the sun began to set, the team leader decided to call it a day and regroup in the morning. But Rita and I stayed behind, not ready to give up just yet. We set up a small camp, planning to continue our search at first light. As night fell, the forest around us seemed to come alive with sounds, twigs snapping, leaves rustling, and occasionally a distant cry that could have been an animal or something else. "Remember that horror movie we watched last month?" Rita asked, trying to lighten the mood. "The one where the campers get picked off one by one?" "Yeah, let's not go there," I replied, forcing a laugh. "This is real life, Rita. We'll be fine." We settled in for the night, taking turns keeping watch. Around midnight I heard it again, that low, guttural sound we'd heard in the clearing. My heart started pounding as I woke Rita. "It's back," I whispered, my voice barely audible. We grabbed our flashlights and shone them into the trees. For a moment, there was nothing but the dark shapes of the forest. Then, just at the edge of the light, we saw it. The creature was standing perfectly still, watching us with those glowing yellow eyes. "Rita, get the flare gun," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She fumbled in her pack, finally pulling out the gun and aiming it at the creature. The flare shot into the sky, casting an eerie red glow over everything. The creature hissed and retreated into the shadows. "We need to move." "Now," Rita said, grabbing our gear. We didn't bother packing up, just took what we could carry and started back toward the truck. The forest seemed to close in around us, every sound amplified in the darkness. We could hear the creature following, keeping just out of sight. Finally, we broke through the trees and saw the truck up ahead. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. The creature lunged out of the shadows, knocking Rita to the ground. She screamed, trying to fend it off as it clawed at her. "Rita!" I yelled, pulling my hunting knife from my belt. I ran at the creature, slashing at it with the blade. It turned on me, its yellow eyes burning with fury. I felt a searing pain as it raked its claws across my chest, but I didn't stop. I kept slashing, finally driving the blade deep into its side. The creature let out a horrible screech and fled into the woods, leaving a trail of dark, viscous blood behind. I collapsed next to Rita, panting and bleeding. "You okay?" I asked, my voice shaky. "I've been better," she replied with a weak laugh. "Let's get out of here." We managed to get to the truck and drove back to the ranger station. We were both treated for our injuries, and this time the higher-ups were forced to take our story seriously. A search team was sent out the next day, but the creature was gone. All they found were more strange tracks and the remains of Sophia Chen, half buried near the clearing where we'd first seen the tracks. The official report called it an animal attack. But Rita and I knew better. We never spoke about it publicly, but among ourselves we called it the Wendigo, a name from Native American folklore, a creature of the forest that preys on humans. Life went on, but things were never quite the same. Rita and I still work as rangers, but we're more cautious now, more aware of the things that might be lurking in the shadows of the forest. And every so often, late at night, I hear that low, guttural sound and wonder if it's come back, looking for us. We never saw the creature again, but the memory of that night stays with me. It's a reminder that there are things out there we don't understand, things that can't be explained away by science or reason. So if you're ever out in the woods and you hear something strange, trust your instincts. You never know what might be watching from just beyond the firelight. As for Rita, she eventually transferred to another park, hoping for a quieter life. We keep in touch, swapping stories and sometimes laughing about that night. But deep down, we both know there's nothing funny about it. It's a part of us now, a shared secret that we carry with us. And if anyone ever asks why I still patrol the woods despite everything that happened, I just smile and say, someone's got to keep an eye out for the Wendigo. Life as a ranger isn't easy, but it's the life I chose. And despite everything, I wouldn't trade it for anything. The forest is my home, and I'll keep it safe no matter what. Because out there somewhere, I know the Wendigo is watching, waiting for the right moment to strike again. And when it does, I'll be ready.